Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The small gymnasium in South Carolina had seen better days. Faded banners of past glory hung crookedly from the rafters, and the squeak of sneakers on the worn wooden floor echoed in the otherwise silent space. The bleachers were half full, and the few spectators in attendance didn't seem to have much faith in the game. They sat there, watching the local high school team with a mix of skepticism and resignation. It had been years since the team had won any notable game, and tonight, it seemed like no one was expecting any different. The players, a group of young athletes with potential but little confidence, warmed up quietly. There was no energy in the room, no anticipation, just the sound of the ball bouncing against the floor, the occasional shouted command from the coach. The team's record had been dismal this season, and their last few games had been more of a formality than a contest. Everyone in the town had hoped for a spark, something to ignite a fire in the team, but it had yet to come. Behind the scenes, the coach tried to rally his players with pep talks, but his words were starting to fall on deaf ears. The players were growing tired of hearing the same speeches, and the constant losses made it harder to believe that anything could change. Each player carried his own baggage, self-doubt, frustration, and the weight of the team's failures. Some had started to question their futures in basketball. Others, older players, had already accepted that this was just the way things were, and it was unlikely to change. The idea of a real victory seemed out of reach, something that only happened to teams with a history of success, not to a group like theirs. One evening, as the team prepared for their next game, the coach gathered the players in the locker room for a final round of motivation. They could hear the crowd slowly trickling in, but it wasn't the usual buzz of excitement. Tonight felt like another obligatory game, one that would end just like the rest, with disappointment. "Listen up, everyone," the coach began, trying to inject some life into his voice. "I know we've had a rough season, but I believe in each and every one of you. There's talent in this room. It's not about what the scoreboard says. It's about showing what you're made of. We've been through the worst of it. Tonight is an opportunity for us to show everyone that we're more than just our record. We're a team, and we can still make something happen if we want it." Some of the players nodded, but their expressions were skeptical. It was hard to believe in a comeback when they hadn't seen any tangible progress. It felt like they were just going through the motions, playing for the sake of playing. The gym wasn't full. The excitement was missing. And the doubt among the team was palpable. Meanwhile, in the stands, a lone figure watched from a quiet corner. Michael Jordan had spent his career on the biggest stages, facing the highest of expectations, but tonight, he was a man quietly observing from a distance. He wasn't there to be recognized, not to give a speech or make a public appearance. He wasn't even there to watch a specific player, he was there to see something bigger than just basketball. Jordan had been following the struggles of the high school team from afar, drawn in by the idea that sometimes, young players just needed a push. He had seen his fair share of talented individuals who lacked the confidence to take their games to the next level, and he knew how much of a difference belief could make. He had been asked to help, but Jordan didn't want to do something as predictable as a public appearance or a simple donation. What this team needed wasn't just financial support or a motivational speech. It needed something much more impactful. It needed someone who truly understood the weight of expectations, the pressure to succeed, and what it took to rise above it all. That's when Jordan decided to do something unexpected. In the days leading up to the game, he quietly arranged to buy every single ticket to the match. Every seat in the gym was filled, not by the usual few supporters, but by a sea of strangers who, for one night, would cheer for a team that was struggling to find its footing. The gym would be packed. The players would walk into an arena full of people, and for once, they wouldn't have to feel alone. Jordan didn't tell anyone about the tickets he had bought. He didn't want the players to know the reason the gym was packed, and he certainly didn't want the media to catch wind of it. This was not a stunt for publicity. This was about giving a team that had been written off a chance to feel the energy of support, to play like they mattered. The night of the game arrived, and the players filed out into the gym, their heads down as they prepared for the usual disappointment. They had seen empty stands before, and they expected to see the same tonight. But as they walked into the gym, something was different. The bright lights of the arena illuminated a full, buzzing crowd, an audience they had never had before. The stands, usually sparse, were now packed with people, strangers who came together to watch a game that seemed, on paper, like nothing special. The buzz of the crowd hit them like a wave. For a moment, the players stood frozen, not sure how to react. They were so used to the emptiness, to the silence, that this sudden burst of energy left them in shock. But as they scanned the crowd, they noticed something strange. There, alone, sitting in the center of the stands, was none other than Michael Jordan. He sat quietly, without fanfare, without the attention that would usually accompany his presence. Just one man, surrounded by strangers, watching them. The players couldn't believe it. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player in history, was sitting alone in the stands, watching them. It was a moment that could have overwhelmed them. It could have made them more nervous, more uncertain. But as they took in the sight of him sitting there, they felt something shift inside them. It wasn't just about the crowd anymore. It wasn't just about the game they had to win. It was about proving something, not to anyone in the stands, but to themselves. Jordan's silent presence was a challenge. He wasn't there to give them a pep talk or offer advice. He wasn't there to distract them with any form of celebrity. He was there to make a statement: you have what it takes. The players began to realize what was happening. This wasn't about winning for the crowd or for Jordan, it was about winning for themselves. The thought of playing for such an iconic figure, knowing that he was quietly watching their every move, filled them with an unexpected sense of pride. They felt seen in a way they had never felt before. This wasn't a game they could lose, not with that kind of belief hanging in the air. The game began, and the difference was immediate. The players moved with more confidence, passed the ball more fluidly, and attacked the basket with a renewed energy. Every time they looked toward the stands, they saw Jordan sitting there, watching them. His presence, his belief, pushed them to be better than they thought they could be. They weren't just playing for the crowd or the scoreboard, they were playing for themselves, for their own pride, and for the chance to show the legend sitting in the stands that they were worthy of his attention. As the game progressed, the team grew stronger. They worked together, communicated on the court, and for the first time in a long time, they believed they could win. The game wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The team played with heart, pushing through the challenges and doubts that had haunted them for so long. By the final whistle, they had pulled off the impossible. The scoreboard flashed the numbers: victory for the underdogs. The gym erupted in cheers. The players, in disbelief, high-fived each other, their smiles wide, their energy uncontainable. They had won, but more than that, they had found something they had lost: their belief in themselves. And there, still sitting alone in the stands, was Michael Jordan. He didn't jump up or rush to the court. He simply smiled, content in the knowledge that, for one night, he had given these young players the greatest gift: the belief that they could achieve greatness on their own. The night of the game had arrived, and the energy inside the gym was palpable, though it wasn't the kind of excitement one might expect for a high school basketball game. For a small town in South Carolina, this was supposed to be just another Friday night, routine, predictable, and maybe a little dull. The stands were usually half-filled, at best, with the occasional cheerleader or a few loyal fans scattered across the bleachers. This game, like so many others, was expected to end in a loss, with little fanfare and no real hope for a turning point. But tonight was different. The gym was packed, and as the players trickled in for their warm-up, they could feel the unfamiliar weight of hundreds of eyes on them. The normally empty bleachers were filled to the brim, with strangers filling every seat, the noise of conversation rising as the crowd adjusted to their new surroundings. The lights were brighter, the air thicker, and the players had a difficult time focusing on their drills. As they stretched and tossed the ball back and forth, there was a sense of unease in the air. No one had expected this. The team had been struggling all season, and now, for some reason, the gym was packed, a rarity for a team that hadn't shown much promise. The excitement that should have felt empowering instead felt like an ominous weight. The coach, standing to the side, seemed just as confused as the players. He had no idea who had bought out all the tickets, or why the gym was full of unfamiliar faces. He had been coaching this team for years, and while he had seen his share of tough losses, he had never seen the community get behind the team like this. He watched as his players looked around, trying to make sense of the crowd, but their minds were far from the game. "Focus, gentlemen," the coach shouted, clapping his hands. "We're here to play basketball, not to get distracted. Look, we've had our fair share of tough games. But we need to remember one thing tonight. This game is about proving to ourselves that we're better than what our record says. It's about us. It's not about the crowd. It's not about the hype. Let's show up for ourselves. You're capable of more than you think." The players nodded, but their faces showed little confidence. Their heads were still turning to scan the packed gym. They were nervous. They were scared. The idea of playing in front of a full gym, of being watched by so many strangers, felt like too much to bear. Most of them hadn't been in a situation where the stakes were so high, where there were so many eyes on them, waiting for them to perform. But what they didn't know was that the game tonight was about to change everything, not because of the crowd, not because of the coach's speech, but because someone in the stands believed in them more than they believed in themselves. As the players ran through their warm-ups, the man who had orchestrated this night sat in silence, watching from the stands. Michael Jordan sat alone, his figure easily recognizable even from the back. There was no entourage, no bodyguards, no cameras, just him, quietly observing. For Jordan, this night wasn't about him. It wasn't about showing up and reminding the town of his fame. He had a specific goal in mind, one that went beyond the usual accolades or recognition. He had been following the local team's struggles for a while, quietly learning about the lack of motivation and the self-doubt that had plagued them for years. The team was talented, but they didn't believe it. They didn't believe they could win. Jordan understood that feeling well. He remembered a time when he had doubted himself, back before he had become the player the world knew him to be. It wasn't just about the raw talent, it was about confidence, about believing in yourself when no one else did. He knew that sometimes, the only thing that could spark a change in someone was a simple gesture, an act of faith. And tonight, he was going to show these young players that someone believed in them, someone who had been to the highest heights and seen the deepest lows. Someone who knew the value of pushing through the doubts. The game began, and the first few minutes were rough. The opposing team was just as hungry for victory, and the pressure seemed to take hold of the home team. They fumbled passes, missed easy shots, and allowed the other team to gain an early lead. The gym, packed with spectators, was starting to buzz with anticipation, but it wasn't the kind of energy that helped. It was the kind of energy that added weight to the players' shoulders. As the first half wore on, the home team's lack of confidence became more and more apparent. They were playing not to lose, rather than playing to win. And as the halftime buzzer sounded, the score reflected the team's mental state. They were trailing by double digits. In the locker room, the coach tried his best to keep the team focused. He told them to keep their heads in the game, to believe that they could still turn it around. He pointed out their potential, urging them to push through the fear of failure. But the players didn't believe him. It was hard to believe in themselves when they had been let down so many times before. The doubt was thick in the air. As the team filed back onto the court for the second half, Jordan remained where he had been, still sitting quietly in the stands, observing them without a word. He had watched the first half, noticing the moments when the players hesitated, when they doubted themselves. They needed more than just a coach's words, they needed to feel that they weren't alone in their struggle. The second half began, and something shifted. Maybe it was the realization that they had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was the pressure of the full gym, the weight of the people who were now cheering them on. Or maybe it was the subtle influence of the man in the stands, who had already proven that he believed in them before they believed in themselves. The team started playing with more aggression, more confidence. They began to attack the basket with a renewed energy, their passes crisper, their defense more aggressive. It wasn't perfect, they still made mistakes, but there was something different about the way they were moving. They were playing for each other, and for the first time, they were playing for themselves. As the final minutes of the game ticked down, the lead shrank. The gym was electric with every play. The home team wasn't just fighting for the win, they were fighting for something more. They were fighting to prove that they could overcome the odds, that they could take control of their own destiny. With just seconds remaining, the game was tied. The ball was in the hands of one of the team's star players, a young guard who had been struggling throughout the game but had stepped up when it mattered most. He dribbled towards the basket, the clock ticking down. The gym was silent, every eye on him. He had the chance to make history, to do what no one had expected. The shot went up, time seemed to slow as the ball sailed through the air. The crowd held its breath. The ball swished through the net, and the gym erupted into chaos. The underdog team had done the impossible. They had won. The players looked to the stands, and there, still sitting alone, was Michael Jordan. He had never moved, never celebrated outwardly. But his silent presence had been the spark they needed. As the team rushed to celebrate, Jordan stood up and walked toward the court, his quiet nod acknowledging their victory. It wasn't about the applause or the recognition. It was about showing up for the players who needed to see that someone believed in them. They had proven to themselves what they were capable of, and Jordan's belief in them had made all the difference. The gymnasium was buzzing with energy. The once quiet corners of the high school gym, normally reserved for a few scattered fans, were now packed with people, most of whom had no connection to the team. They had come for a reason that none of the players could yet understand, a reason that would only reveal itself in the coming moments. As the team stood huddled, waiting for the game to begin, their nerves were palpable. The sound of the crowd's chatter, mixed with the squeak of shoes on the wooden floor, seemed to heighten the tension in the air. The opposing team entered the court first, their heads held high, moving with a sense of confidence that was in stark contrast to the home team's anxiousness. The players, despite their physical capabilities, struggled with a mental block that had been reinforced over weeks, months, and even years of defeat. Tonight, as much as they wanted to win, the thought of facing a crowded gym made them feel more exposed than ever before. They could feel the eyes on them, feel the weight of all those expectations. The coach tried his best to encourage the team, but he was just as unsure as they were. His usual pep talks seemed hollow, knowing that they had been given a dozen times before, and the result had always been the same. Losing. That bitter taste that lingered after every game, no matter how hard they tried, no matter how much heart they put into it. As the buzzer rang and the game began, the players slowly took their positions, hesitant at first. Their shots missed wide, their passes were sloppy, and they couldn't find their rhythm. It was clear from the start that they were overwhelmed. The ball bounced around the court, almost as though it was testing them, daring them to grab hold of it and take control. The scoreboard reflected the mounting pressure. The opposing team had taken an early lead, and the home team, unsure of themselves, couldn't quite keep up. Each missed shot, each misstep, made them feel smaller. They had never been in a situation like this before, playing with such high stakes, with the whole town watching. The weight of the packed stands, the sea of faces in every corner, felt like a burden they weren't ready to carry. On the sideline, the coach stood with his arms crossed, watching his players struggle. He knew the team had talent, but they lacked something fundamental, belief. How could he ask them to perform when they couldn't even perform for themselves? It was easy to tell them to play hard, to give it their all, but tonight, that was easier said than done. They weren't playing with heart, they were playing with fear. And in the middle of it all, Michael Jordan sat alone in the stands, silently observing. He had arrived unnoticed, his presence barely registering with the team. He wasn't here to make a grand entrance or to draw attention. He was here for a much more subtle reason, to offer the kind of support that went beyond the surface level. Jordan was an icon, a living legend. He had played in front of thousands, won championships, and faced immense pressure. He knew what it felt like to walk into an arena with the eyes of the world on you. But tonight, he was not here to bask in the spotlight. He was here to remind these young players of something they had long forgotten, the power of belief. Jordan's role was clear. He was there to be the silent witness, the quiet motivator. He wasn't going to step in or disrupt the flow of the game. He was going to watch. He was going to show them that someone, somewhere, believed in them. And by doing so, he hoped to ignite something inside them, something that could help them push past the doubt that had become their biggest adversary. As the first half of the game wore on, the tension in the gym grew thicker. The home team struggled to maintain composure as the scoreboard continued to slip out of their reach. Each possession felt like a missed opportunity, and with each failed attempt, the crowd grew louder, more expectant. The game was slipping away, and there didn't seem to be anything the team could do to stop it. At halftime, the coach gathered the team in the locker room, his face drawn with frustration. He could feel the anxiety seeping through the walls. "Listen, I know we're behind, but I still believe in you guys," he said, his voice a little too quiet for someone in his position. "We've got one half left. Let's not waste it. Play for each other. Play for yourselves." But the words didn't seem to sink in. The players were already mentally checked out, their heads clouded by the pressure of the crowd, the looming defeat. They didn't believe they could win, not against this team, not with everything that had gone wrong. The halftime talk ended, and the players sluggishly moved back onto the court, their confidence shattered even further. As they walked out of the locker room, something changed. They noticed the crowd more clearly now, how they were all staring at them, waiting for them to deliver something, to make this game meaningful. But it wasn't the pressure of the crowd that made a difference, it was the figure sitting alone in the stands. As the players passed by the bleachers, their eyes found him, Michael Jordan. There he was, quietly seated, watching them. Not standing for a standing ovation. Not surrounded by a throng of people. Just one man, sitting there, offering nothing more than his presence. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The players couldn't believe what they were seeing. Jordan had been a legend in their eyes since they first picked up a basketball, and there he was, sitting silently, watching them, believing in them in a way they hadn't believed in themselves. He wasn't here for the headlines, for the media attention. He wasn't here to coach or give them a speech. He was there to show them that they weren't alone, that someone at the top of the game was quietly supporting them, showing them that it was possible to overcome self-doubt and achieve greatness. The presence of Jordan in that moment, so humble, so silent, had a profound effect. The players began to realize that the pressure of the crowd didn't have to be a burden. It could be a motivator. They weren't playing for a crowd that expected them to fail. They were playing for the chance to prove something to themselves, to show that they could rise above their doubts. As the second half began, the game was far from over, but the atmosphere had changed. The players were playing with more heart. Their passes became sharper, their shots more confident. They were moving together as a team, feeding off the energy of the crowd and, in a way, of Jordan's presence. It wasn't perfect, there were still mistakes, still moments of hesitation. But there was something different in the air, a new belief that had been sparked in them. As the minutes ticked away, the gap between the teams slowly began to close. The home team's energy was undeniable now. They had found something they hadn't thought they possessed, their own potential. They fought hard, scrapped for every point, and with each successful play, they grew bolder, more determined. They weren't playing for anyone but themselves now. They weren't playing to avoid failure. They were playing to win, because for the first time, they truly believed they could. The gym was electric by the final minutes of the game, the crowd on the edge of their seats. Every dribble, every shot, every pass was met with a roar of approval or groans of anxiety. The team, now fully invested in the game, was playing the best basketball they had all season. And as the clock wound down, with only seconds remaining, the game was tied. The ball was in their hands. The weight of the moment was heavy, but the players were no longer afraid. They weren't thinking about the score, or the crowd, or the coach. They were focused on the one thing that mattered, finishing what they had started. The final shot went up. Time seemed to stretch as the ball hung in the air. And then, it swished through the net. The gym erupted, and the team, in disbelief, rushed the court to celebrate. They had won. They had done the impossible. The players looked to the stands, and there, still sitting alone, was Michael Jordan. His face showed no signs of dramatic celebration, but the pride in his eyes was undeniable. He had believed in them from the very beginning, not because of their talent, but because he knew they had it in them. His silent support had made all the difference. In that moment, the team had won more than just a game, they had won their belief in themselves. And they had done it with the quiet strength of one man who believed in them long before they believed in themselves. The gym was alive with noise. The crowd, which had been quiet and unsure of what to expect at the start of the game, was now fully engaged. Every dribble of the ball, every pass, every fast break was met with a roar of excitement. The underdog team, the one that had been written off by many, was not just competing, they were thriving. Their once lackluster play had turned into something electric. Confidence, once absent, was now taking over the court, and as the minutes ticked down, the game had transformed into something far more than just a local high school matchup. For the players, it was as if a switch had been flipped. The nervous energy that had weighed them down earlier was now replaced by focus. They were no longer intimidated by the full stands or the presence of Michael Jordan sitting silently in the crowd. Instead, they felt like they had something to prove, not just to the crowd, but to themselves. They realized that they had the ability to take control of this game, to rewrite the story that had been dictated to them for so long. Every player on the team had a moment where they stepped up, where they decided that they wouldn't let this opportunity slip away. The star player, a young guard who had been struggling throughout the first half, had found a rhythm. His shots, once wild and unfocused, were now hitting their mark. His confidence grew with each successful basket, and his teammates began to rally behind him. The forward, who had been known more for his defense than his offense, was driving to the basket with determination. The center, once slow and unsure, was now a force on the boards, pulling down rebounds that were critical to keeping the team in the game. The coach, watching from the sidelines, had to suppress a smile. It wasn't just the improvement in their play, it was the way they had come together as a team. They were no longer individuals struggling to make a difference. They were a cohesive unit, feeding off each other's energy, each pass, each play. He had seen potential in them from the start, but it had always been hidden behind a wall of doubt. Now, that wall was crumbling, and the players were finally showing what they were capable of. As the game progressed, the momentum shifted more and more in favor of the home team. The visiting team, which had been so sure of itself at the beginning, was now visibly frustrated. They began to make mistakes, committing turnovers and missing easy shots. Their defense, once suffocating, now looked disjointed. It was as though the underdog team, fueled by their belief in themselves, had taken control of the game, and the other team was left scrambling to keep up. Throughout it all, Jordan remained in his seat, watching the game unfold in front of him. His eyes never left the court, but he never stood up. There were no gestures of approval or encouragement, no grand speeches or motivating words. His presence alone was enough. He was there because he believed in them, because he knew that sometimes, all a player needed was to feel seen, to know that someone, even a legend, was rooting for them. The game was now in its final minutes, and the scoreboard reflected what had seemed impossible just an hour ago. The home team had managed to close the gap, and now they were ahead by just a few points. The crowd was on its feet, the energy in the gym reaching a fever pitch. Each possession was met with loud cheers or groans, depending on the outcome. The opposing team, stunned by the sudden turnaround, was beginning to crack under the pressure. With only seconds left, the home team had possession. They needed one final play to secure the win. The ball was in the hands of the young guard, the player who had struggled early in the game but had found his footing. He dribbled slowly, surveying the defense, waiting for an opening. His teammates moved into position, ready to support him. The gym was silent, the crowd holding its breath as the final seconds ticked down. The guard made his move, driving toward the basket with determination. The defender lunged to block him, but the guard sidestepped, then leaped toward the hoop. The ball flew through the air, spinning in what felt like slow motion. The gym collectively held its breath as it approached the basket. Time seemed to freeze. Then, the ball swished through the net. The crowd erupted. The gym, which had been so quiet just moments before, was now alive with the sound of cheers. The home team had won, and in a dramatic turn of events, they had done the unthinkable. They had beaten a team that had seemed unbeatable. They had pulled off the impossible. The players, overwhelmed with emotion, rushed onto the court, jumping and shouting in celebration. They embraced each other, grinning from ear to ear. They had just won a game they were never supposed to win, against all odds. The coach joined in, his usual composure replaced by pure joy. He had watched his team grow in front of his eyes, and now they were standing on the court, victorious. The players looked toward the stands, and their eyes found him again, Michael Jordan. He was still sitting in his seat, watching the celebration unfold, his face calm and approving. His quiet belief in them had made all the difference. He hadn't spoken a word, hadn't given them a speech or a motivational slogan. But in his silent presence, he had given them something more valuable than any pep talk could ever provide, the belief that they could achieve greatness, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The players rushed over to Jordan, still grinning, unable to contain their excitement. They had just pulled off a victory they would never forget, and they knew they owed part of that to the man who had silently shown up for them when they needed it most. "Thank you," one of the players said, breathless from the excitement. "We did it. We actually did it." Jordan looked up at them, his expression a mixture of pride and quiet satisfaction. "You did it," he said simply. "You all did it." As the players celebrated with the crowd, Jordan stood up and quietly made his way toward the exit. He didn't need the recognition, didn't need the attention. His role was to show up when others needed him most, to remind people that greatness came from within, not from external validation. He had watched these young players find something inside themselves that they had never believed was there. And that, to him, was the true meaning of success. As he left the gym, the sound of the celebration continued to echo in his ears. The team had won, but the real victory was in the transformation that had taken place, on the court, in their hearts, and in their belief. They were no longer just a struggling team. They were winners, not because of the scoreboard, but because they had learned to believe in themselves, to rise above the challenges, and to show the world what they were capable of. And as Jordan walked out into the night, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. His job was done. He had reminded them of their potential. Now, it was up to them to carry that belief forward, to keep pushing, to keep winning, not just on the court, but in life. As the night wore on and the adrenaline from the game began to settle, the gymnasium was filled with a sense of triumph. The home team, once a group of underachieving players, had just completed one of the most improbable comebacks in high school basketball history. The final buzzer had barely gone off, and yet the gym was still alive with the sound of applause, cheers, and celebratory shouts. The players, still catching their breath, were overcome with emotion. They had done it. They had turned around a season that had seemed lost. But it wasn't just the victory that made this night stand out, it was the belief that had been ignited within them. No one had expected them to win. They hadn't expected it themselves. Yet here they were, standing tall in the glow of a hard-fought victory, surrounded by fans who had only just begun to believe in them. And the biggest reason for this newfound belief wasn't just the win. It was Michael Jordan, the man who had quietly watched from the stands, who had given them the gift of belief without saying a word. The players slowly filtered out of the gym, still soaking in the atmosphere. They had earned this victory, but more than that, they had earned something more intangible, a sense of confidence and purpose that had been missing from their lives for too long. The coach, too, stood at the edge of the court, watching as the team celebrated. He felt a mix of pride and disbelief. It wasn't just that they had won, it was that they had done it in a way that no one thought possible. They had believed in themselves, and it had made all the difference. As the gym began to empty out, the players gathered in the locker room, their faces alight with joy. The usual post-game rituals were in full swing, high fives, laughter, and a few shouts of excitement, but there was something different in the air. They weren't just celebrating the win. They were celebrating a change within themselves. They had started the game as a group of individuals, each struggling with their own doubts and insecurities. But they had finished the game as a team, united, confident, and, for the first time, believing in their own potential. The coach entered the locker room, his voice rising above the noise of celebration. "All right, listen up," he called out. "I'm proud of each and every one of you. This win isn't just about tonight. It's about what you showed out there: heart, determination, and most of all, belief. You didn't just play for the win. You played because you believed you could do it. And that, gentlemen, is how you win, not just in basketball, but in life." The players fell silent for a moment, absorbing his words. It wasn't often the coach got so emotional, but tonight, he had every right to. This game had been the culmination of not just their physical effort, but their mental transformation. The coach's words rang true. They hadn't just won a game. They had proven to themselves that they were capable of greatness, not just in the context of sports, but in everything they did. As the coach finished speaking, there was a sudden knock on the door. The players exchanged confused glances. Who could it be at this hour? The door opened, and there, standing in the doorway, was Michael Jordan. The room went silent. The players, still riding the high of their victory, froze, unable to process the fact that the greatest basketball player of all time was standing in front of them. Jordan stepped into the locker room, his expression calm but filled with pride. "I just wanted to come by and say congratulations," he said, his voice steady and warm. "You guys did something tonight that you didn't think you could do. You proved something to yourselves, and that's what matters most. Not the scoreboard, not the crowd. What matters is that you played with heart. You played like you belonged. That's what champions do." The room remained silent for a moment, the players still in shock. And then, one by one, they started to cheer, to laugh, to applaud. This was the moment they had dreamed of, standing in front of Michael Jordan, hearing him speak about their game, their effort. But it wasn't just the recognition from the greatest player ever that mattered. It was the fact that Jordan's belief in them had been the spark they needed. He hadn't been there to give them a game plan or a strategy. He had been there to show them that someone believed they could do it, and sometimes that was all it took. "Thank you, Mr. Jordan," one of the players said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You don't know what this means to us." Jordan smiled. "I think I do," he replied. "I've been in your shoes. I know what it feels like to be doubted, to struggle to find your place. But you've proven something tonight, not just to the people watching, but to yourselves. Remember this feeling. Let it drive you for the rest of your careers. It's not about winning every game, but about never giving up on yourself." As Jordan turned to leave, the players stood frozen for a moment longer, taking in the gravity of the moment. They had just been given more than a victory. They had been given the kind of lesson that could carry them through the rest of their lives. It wasn't about the wins or the losses, it was about the belief in themselves and in their ability to rise above the challenges they would face, both on and off the court. The team left the locker room, their heads held higher than they had ever been. The victory was sweet, but the real transformation had happened inside them. They had seen the impact of believing in themselves, of knowing that someone outside of their world believed in them too. Michael Jordan's quiet presence had done more than just motivate them, it had reminded them of the power of believing in the impossible. The next few weeks were different for the team. The victory wasn't just a flash in the pan, it was the beginning of a new mindset. The players began to approach each game with more confidence, more determination. They were no longer playing for a crowd or for a coach. They were playing for each other and for the legacy of belief that had been instilled in them that night. The games that followed weren't all victories, but the way they approached each challenge was transformed. They played like winners, not because they were always victorious, but because they understood the true meaning of success. As the season progressed, the team began to attract attention. The local news outlets picked up on their newfound success, but it wasn't just their record that impressed people, it was their spirit, their belief. The town, once apathetic to their struggles, now rallied behind them. Fans came to the games in droves, not just because they were winning, but because they could see that something special was happening. This wasn't just a team. This was a group of young athletes who had found their way, and they were doing it together. The rest of the season was a testament to the transformation that had taken place within the team. They had gone from the underdogs to a group of confident young players who could take on any challenge. And while they didn't make it to the championship that year, their journey was far from over. The lessons they had learned, the belief they had gained, would carry them into the next chapter of their lives, both on and off the court. And as for Michael Jordan, he had left them with more than just the memory of a game. He had given them the gift of belief, and in doing so, he had helped shape the next generation of athletes who would, in turn, inspire the next. In that quiet moment of watching them play, he had shown them what it truly meant to be great, not in the eyes of the world, but in their own. The impact of that game lingered long after the final whistle. For the team, the victory over the odds was no longer just a statistic, it was a turning point. What had started as a season marked by frustration and doubt was now a story of redemption and newfound confidence. The next few games unfolded with a renewed sense of purpose. The underdog team, once written off, had begun to play with a sense of conviction that had been missing from their previous efforts. Every pass seemed sharper, every decision more purposeful. The town, which had once watched their games with the detached indifference of people expecting failure, began to show up in greater numbers. The players could feel the shift in the energy. The stands, which had often been half empty, were now packed, and the support from the community was palpable. Parents, friends, and teachers all began attending the games, offering more than just applause. They were cheering with real belief, not because the team was winning, but because the players had earned their respect. They were no longer just the high school team, they were a symbol of what could happen when belief was fostered, when doubt was cast aside, and when you simply refused to accept failure as the only option. The players themselves noticed the change. The once quiet hallways were now filled with encouraging words from classmates. They were no longer just kids in the background, they were the focal point of a town that had long since stopped believing in them. The quiet locker room had turned into a place of camaraderie and laughter. The players were bonding in ways they hadn't before, sharing jokes and stories. The air was lighter, and for the first time, they were playing with a sense of freedom. The burden of previous failures had been lifted, and they were discovering that they had the power to shape their own destiny. But it wasn't just the victories that defined this newfound energy. The team began to understand something deeper. It was never about the scoreboard. It wasn't about the expectations placed on them by the outside world. It was about the connection between them, the unspoken understanding that they were in this together, that their success or failure was determined by their collective effort. The individuals who had once been uncertain of their roles in the team now embraced their responsibilities with pride. The coach, too, had experienced a shift. When he had first taken on the role, he had believed in his team's potential, but like everyone else, he had been weighed down by the constant string of losses. But now, as he watched them play with a renewed sense of purpose, he realized something he hadn't fully understood before: they didn't need a coach to give them all the answers. They needed a coach to believe in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. His role wasn't just to call plays or make strategic decisions. His real job was to foster the kind of environment where these players could thrive. The victory over the odds had made him a better coach, someone who understood that leadership wasn't about the loudest voice in the room, but the quiet, steady belief that kept the team focused when they needed it most. Then came the day when they found out about the upcoming game against their biggest rival. The team had already started to turn heads in the local league, but this was different. This was a team they hadn't been able to beat in years, a team that had long been their measure of success or failure. The rival team was known for its speed, its athleticism, and its winning streak. They were the kind of team that made opponents nervous before the game even began. For the home team, this game represented not just a chance to win, it was a chance to prove that they belonged on the same court as the best. The coach gathered the players before the game, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "This game doesn't have to define us," he said. "But it's a chance to show that we can stand toe-to-toe with anyone. We've come a long way since that first game. And it's because we're no longer playing for anyone else, we're playing for each other. We've earned this. Now, let's show them who we are. The players nodded, their faces set with determination. There was no fear this time. No doubt. They knew they had already proven something to themselves, something far more valuable than any victory could provide. They had found their confidence, their rhythm, and their belief in one another. The gym was packed as the game began, just as it had been in the game before. The energy was high, the crowd loud, and the atmosphere was charged with excitement. The rivalry was more than just a game, it was a test of how far they had come. Every player felt the weight of the moment, but they didn't back down. The first few minutes were intense. The rival team, as expected, came out strong, setting a fast pace and challenging the home team in ways they hadn't been challenged before. But the home team, the once underdog players, didn't flinch. They matched their rival's speed, their intensity. Their passes were crisp, their defense tighter than ever. The game, though competitive, didn't feel like it had in the past. The players weren't just trying to keep up, they were playing like they had a shot at winning. And the more they played, the more the realization began to settle in. They were in this game not by accident, but because they had earned the right to be there. The crowd, who had come out to see the spectacle of a rivalry game, began to shift their focus. It wasn't just the opposing team they were watching, it was the home team's rise from the depths of doubt. The players were turning heads, impressing everyone with their teamwork and their energy. They had quickly gained a reputation as the team to watch, but this was different. This wasn't just about the scoreboard anymore. This was about proving that they belonged at the top, that they weren't just a team that played under the radar. They were the team that had learned how to fight, how to play with heart. The game went back and forth, each team taking turns gaining and losing the lead. But as the final minutes approached, it was clear that the home team had found a way to put it all together. Their once weak defense had become impenetrable, and their offense was clicking in ways it hadn't before. Every player on the floor was contributing, no one was carrying the load alone. They had become a unit, a collective force that was greater than the sum of its parts. With just seconds left on the clock, the game was tied. The ball was in the hands of the home team star player, the young guard who had come to represent the heart of the team. He had been here before, during moments of doubt, but now, as he dribbled the ball at the top of the key, he was playing with the same confidence that had led them this far. His eyes were locked on the hoop, and he could hear the crowd growing quieter with each passing second. The final play was unfolding in real time. He moved toward the basket, his teammates positioning themselves around him. He wasn't just playing for the win, he was playing for everything they had been through, everything they had overcome. As the clock ticked down, he made his move, driving hard toward the hoop, his focus sharp, his confidence unshakable. And as he released the ball, the gym fell into silence. The shot flew through the air, the crowd holding its breath. And then, it swished through the net. The gym erupted into chaos. The players rushed the court, their joy uncontained. They had done it, they had beaten their biggest rival, and in doing so, they had solidified their place as contenders. But this win, like the one before it, wasn't just about the game. It was about proving to themselves that they could overcome any challenge, any obstacle, and that the belief they had in each other was their greatest strength. As the players celebrated, they looked up to the stands, but this time, they didn't need to find Michael Jordan. They knew the real victory was in their hearts, they had learned to believe in themselves. As the weeks passed, the team continued to build on the momentum they had gained from that unforgettable night. What was once a group of athletes weighed down by insecurities and disappointments had transformed into a cohesive unit, playing with a sense of purpose and pride. They approached every practice, every game, with the same mentality. They were not just playing for the win, they were playing to prove something to themselves, to show that they belonged. The crowd, once sparse and indifferent, now grew larger with each home game. Word had spread about the team's improbable victory and the inspiration they had received from Michael Jordan's quiet, unspoken belief in them. The gym, which had always felt small and confining, was now filled with the energy of a community that had rallied around these young players. The stands were packed, and the air was electric with anticipation. But this time, the players didn't feel the pressure. They had learned to harness that energy, turning it into confidence rather than anxiety. One of the biggest changes was in the way the team played together. They had started to trust one another, something that had been missing at the beginning of the season. Players who had once been hesitant to pass the ball or take risks were now communicating fluidly, anticipating each other's movements, working as one. Their defense was stronger, their offense more dynamic, and their teamwork, once a glaring weakness, had become their greatest strength. Their rise didn't go unnoticed. Coaches from neighboring schools began to take notice of the team's newfound determination and skill. What had been seen as an afterthought at the start of the season was now a team to watch. It wasn't just the victories they were earning, but the way they were earning them. They were playing like a team, not individuals, and their bond was evident in every game they played. Even the coach, who had once struggled to motivate the players, began to see a shift in the way they approached the game. There was a new sense of ownership among the players. They no longer waited for the coach to tell them what to do, they took initiative. The practices became more focused, the intensity higher. The coach, who had been giving speeches that fell on deaf ears for months, now found his words resonating with his players. They were hungry for improvement, eager to see just how far they could go. Despite the changes, there was one constant: Michael Jordan. He didn't return to the games, and yet his presence was felt every time the team stepped on the court. His quiet act of support had sparked something in the players that couldn't be extinguished by a single victory. Every time they took the floor, they played not just for the win, but for the belief he had shown in them. They had learned that success wasn't defined by the scoreboard, it was about how they played, how they grew, and how they supported one another. But with the new confidence came new challenges. The team, once written off as a group of underdogs, was now a contender. The pressure was higher than it had ever been. They couldn't afford to lose. Their streak of wins had attracted attention, and with that attention came expectations. They were no longer just playing for themselves, they were playing for their town, their fans, and the people who had started to believe in them. The games became tougher. The competition grew fiercer, and with each win, the stakes rose. There were moments when the team faltered, when the pressure seemed too much to bear. In those moments, doubt crept in. Were they really capable of continuing this streak? Could they live up to the hype? The players began to question whether their success had been a fluke, whether they were as good as they had shown the world. And in those moments of uncertainty, they remembered what had gotten them this far: belief. The final stretch of the season was a test of their resolve. Each game felt more important than the last, and the pressure was undeniable. But with every challenge, the team grew stronger. They learned to lean on each other, to trust in their skills and their preparation. They no longer feared failure, they welcomed it, knowing that even if they lost, they had already gained something far more valuable than a trophy. As they entered the playoffs, the team found themselves facing their toughest opponents yet. The gym, once filled with a quiet energy, now buzzed with tension and excitement. The stands were packed, the crowd on the edge of their seats. It was the kind of atmosphere the players had dreamed of but never thought they'd experience. But this time, it wasn't the pressure of the crowd that weighed on them, it was the understanding that they had come too far to back down now. The first playoff game was a brutal test. The opposing team was skilled, aggressive, and determined. The game went back and forth, with both teams refusing to give an inch. The home team, once hesitant and unsure, now fought with the ferocity of a squad that had learned what it took to win. Their defense was sharp, their offense calculated, and every play felt like a reflection of the trust they had built in one another. In the final moments of the game, the score was tied. The clock ticked down, and the home team had possession. The ball was in the hands of their star guard, the same player who had struggled in the early part of the season but had since become their leader. He dribbled toward the basket, his heart pounding in his chest. His teammates spread out, giving him the space he needed to make the play. The opposing team was closing in on him, but the guard didn't panic. He knew what to do. He had been here before. He made his move, spinning past his defender, and took the shot. The ball soared through the air, and for a moment, it seemed as if time had slowed down. The gym was silent as the ball reached the basket, the final seconds hanging in the balance. The ball swished through the net. The crowd erupted. The home team had won. They had done it again. But as the players celebrated, they knew this win was different. They had fought for it, earned it, and proven that they were no longer the underdogs. They were contenders. They were a team that had found its identity and would no longer be defined by its past failures. After the game, the team gathered in the locker room, exhausted but elated. They had made it to the next round of the playoffs, but more importantly, they had made it together. They had done something they had never believed possible. They had achieved what was once unthinkable. The coach walked in, his expression filled with pride. "This is it, boys," he said. "This is what happens when you believe. You've proven to everyone, including yourselves, that you can rise to the occasion. But don't stop now. There's more to do. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep believing." As the players prepared for the next game, they knew their journey was far from over. The road ahead was filled with more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But they also knew one thing for certain: they were capable of anything. They had proven that to themselves. And as they left the locker room that night, their heads held high, they couldn't help but remember the man who had quietly believed in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. Michael Jordan's presence had sparked something in them that no one else had been able to do. He had shown them that belief could change everything. Now, they were living proof of that. The days following their most recent victory were filled with anticipation. The team had proven they could hang with the best, but now, with every win, the pressure mounted. They had made it further than anyone thought possible, and the idea of making it all the way to the finals began to feel more real. Yet with that sense of possibility came a new level of pressure. The small-town underdogs, who had once struggled to even get noticed, were now the team everyone was watching. The excitement, however, was tempered by the realization that they would soon face their toughest opponent yet, a powerhouse team known for its flawless play and relentless drive. As the team prepared for the final stretch of the playoffs, the coach gave one final speech in the locker room before the most important game of their lives. He was no longer the man who had once struggled to inspire. His players had evolved, and his words carried weight now, as he spoke not just to motivate, but to remind them of their journey. "Look at how far we've come," he said, pacing slowly. "We've done something no one thought was possible. But I need you to remember this: we didn't get here because of luck. We got here because of belief. We got here because you decided, each of you, to give it everything you had. This team has earned every win, every inch of respect we've gotten. Now we finish what we started." The players nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of excitement and determination. They had grown close over the course of the season, each one of them knowing that the bond they had forged was stronger than any playbook or strategy could ever be. The game they were about to play was no longer just about basketball, it was about proving who they were, as athletes and as people. The night of the big game arrived, and as the team walked out onto the court, the air felt different. It was thicker, the energy in the gym charged. The stands were packed, but this time, it wasn't just the town supporting them. Fans from all over had come to watch what had turned into the underdog story of the season. The media buzzed about their remarkable rise, and it seemed like everyone was eager to see if the magic could continue. The opposing team was everything they had feared. They were fast, skilled, and incredibly disciplined. Their reputation preceded them, and from the first whistle, it was clear that the home team was up against a well-oiled machine. The rival team moved with precision, each player seemingly anticipating the other's moves. They quickly gained a lead, and it looked, for a while, as though the underdog team would falter under the bright lights and immense pressure. The first quarter was brutal. The shots weren't falling for the home team. Passes went astray. The ball seemed to slip through their fingers. They were playing not to lose rather than playing to win. Every time they made a small run, the rival team responded with a fast break or a three-pointer. The scoreboard seemed to mock them with every point their opponents scored. The coach called a timeout early in the second quarter, sensing the shift in momentum. His voice was calm, but there was a fire behind his words. "This is it, guys," he said. "You're in this game not because anyone expects you to win, but because you've proven that you can. No matter what happens on this floor, you're here because you belong. Look around at each other. This is a team. And we don't back down from anyone. We fight for each other." The players gathered around him, trying to take in the words, but deep down, they were struggling with doubt. They hadn't faced a team this good, and the pressure felt suffocating. But they had come too far to give up now. They had fought for everything they had, and they couldn't let it slip away. As they returned to the floor, the atmosphere shifted. There was a new sense of urgency in their movements, but more importantly, there was a change in their mindset. They weren't playing scared anymore. The opposing team's lead was still large, but they began to fight back, one possession at a time. The defense tightened. Shots began to fall. The crowd responded with a roar as the underdog started closing the gap. The star guard, the player who had struggled earlier in the season but had grown into the team's leader, stepped up in the second half. His confidence had blossomed, and he began taking control of the game. His passes were more accurate, his shot more assured. The team followed his lead. They played with an intensity that matched their opponents, and slowly, the game began to turn in their favor. By the fourth quarter, the gap was nearly closed. Every possession was critical now, and the rival team, once so assured, was starting to show signs of frustration. The underdog team, once written off as too inexperienced to compete, was now outplaying their more seasoned opponents. With each shot, the crowd's energy grew, and the players fed off it, the adrenaline coursing through their veins. With just under a minute left, the game was tied. The gym was roaring, and it felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. The rival team had possession, and it was clear that they were trying to run down the clock and take the last shot. The defense was swarming, closing in on the ball handler with an intensity they hadn't shown in the first half. The rival player dribbled to the top of the key, trying to create space. He faked one way, then tried to spin, but the home team's defense was relentless. It was clear that they had learned from every mistake, had grown stronger with each challenge they had faced. Finally, with only seconds left on the clock, the rival player launched a three-pointer, the shot that could win it all. It felt like time stood still as the ball left his hands. The crowd fell into an eerie silence as the ball arced toward the hoop. But then, with a thud, the ball bounced off the rim. The home team center, who had been a force all night long, grabbed the rebound with both hands, securing possession for the final seconds. The ball was passed quickly to the guard, who was now the focal point of the team's offense. With less than 10 seconds remaining, the guard dribbled up the court, eyes scanning for an opening. His teammates spread out, giving him the space he needed. The opposing team, now frantic, attempted to pressure him, but he was calm, poised. This was his moment, the moment he had worked for his entire life. He reached the three-point line and stopped, eyes locked on the basket. With 3 seconds on the clock, he pulled up for the shot. The ball left his hands in a perfect arc, floating toward the basket. The crowd held its breath as it neared the hoop. And then, the ball swished through the net. The gym exploded in a frenzy of sound. The underdog team had done it. They had beaten the unbeatable team. They had overcome every obstacle, every doubt, and proven that they could rise to the occasion. As the players rushed the court, their faces alight with excitement and disbelief, they looked up at the stands. The gym was full of cheering fans, and for the first time, they realized that they weren't just playing for the win, they were playing for the legacy they were building, the belief that had been instilled in them from that first game. Michael Jordan's silent presence had become a beacon of inspiration that had carried them through the toughest moments. They had earned this victory, not just by winning, but by believing in themselves. And as the buzzer sounded, the team gathered together, knowing that they had accomplished something that would stay with them forever. They had proven that anything was possible when you refused to give up on yourself and your teammates. The dream was no longer a distant hope, it was a reality. They had made it to the finals, and no matter what happened next, they had already won the greatest victory of all, belief in their own potential. The final game of the season had arrived. The underdog team had made it to the championship, the culmination of a journey they could barely have imagined just months before. Their rise had been nothing short of miraculous. From being a team burdened by self-doubt and years of failure to becoming one of the most talked-about teams in the region, they had proven that anything was possible when they came together and believed in themselves. But this was different. The stakes had never been higher, and the pressure was more intense than anything they had faced before. The gym was packed to capacity, filled with a mix of local fans, reporters, and even scouts from bigger schools. This wasn't just another game, this was the game that could define their entire season. This was their shot at greatness. As they prepared in the locker room, the players could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The coach, always the steady presence, tried to keep the mood light, but even he couldn't hide the tension that hung in the air. "You've done everything you need to do to get here," he said, his voice low but firm. "Now, it's time to go out and play the way you know how. This is about belief, belief in each other, belief in yourself. Whatever happens, we've already achieved something great. But we're not done yet." The players nodded, their faces a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They had come so far, and the thought of winning the championship was all too real now. This wasn't just about playing for the trophy, it was about proving they had the heart to finish what they had started. The opponent was a seasoned team, one with a storied history and a roster of players who had been to the finals before. They were powerful, well-coached, and aggressive. The home team knew they would have to fight for every point, and they weren't about to back down. As the game began, the atmosphere in the gym was electric. The crowd was loud, their cheers echoing off the walls, but the players didn't let it rattle them. They had been in high-pressure situations before, and they knew how to channel the energy into their play. The first quarter was tight. The rival team, as expected, came out strong, pushing hard on both offense and defense. But the underdog team was ready. They matched their intensity, refusing to back down. The shots were falling for the underdog team, and they were keeping pace. The lead changed hands several times in the first half, with neither team able to break away. The game was fast, physical, and fiercely competitive. But the home team, with their newfound confidence, wasn't rattled by the rival team's experience or reputation. They were playing for each other now, and that sense of unity was palpable. The star guard, the player who had carried the team throughout the season, was playing with the kind of poise that came with confidence. His decisions were sharp, his passes precise. Every time the rival team looked like they might pull ahead, he seemed to find a way to keep them in the game. But it wasn't just him, every player was contributing. The forward, known for his defense, was shutting down the rival team's best shooter. The center, who had been inconsistent earlier in the season, was dominating the paint, grabbing rebounds and blocking shots. By halftime, the score was tied. The players were exhausted, but they knew they had made it this far by doing things their way. The opposing team was good, but the home team wasn't intimidated anymore. They had proven they belonged, and now they were fighting for more than just a spot in the championship. They were fighting for the right to call themselves the best. The coach gathered them in the locker room during halftime, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "You've got one half left. You've been playing with heart, but now we need to be smarter. Stay focused. Stay disciplined. You know what they'll throw at us, and we know how to respond. Play together, and play like we belong here." The second half began, and the game took on a different tone. The rival team, realizing the underdog team wasn't going away, started playing with a more aggressive edge. They pushed harder, fouling when they needed to, trying to throw off the rhythm of the home team. But the players stayed composed. Every time the rival team tried to pull away, the underdog team found a way to close the gap. The final minutes of the game were a blur. The score was tied again, and the crowd was on their feet. With less than a minute to go, the home team had possession of the ball. The star guard, now completely in control of the game, dribbled slowly down the court. His teammates spread out, giving him room to operate. The rival team's defense was tight, knowing that this was the moment. A single mistake, a missed shot, and the game could be over. The clock ticked down. The star guard's eyes scanned the defense, looking for an opening. The opposing defenders were focused on him, knowing he was the one who could break the game open. But he wasn't panicking. He wasn't forcing anything. He dribbled, waiting for the right moment. The crowd was silent now, every breath held, as if they, too, could feel the weight of the moment. With 5 seconds left on the clock, the guard made his move. He faked left, then spun right, dodging the defender who was trying to close in. The basket was within reach, but there was a second defender ready to block his shot. But the guard didn't hesitate. With a quick motion, he passed the ball to his teammate on the wing, who had been waiting for this moment. The ball left his teammate's hands just as the defender reached for the block. Time seemed to stretch as the ball sailed through the air, the crowd's collective gasp filling the space. The shot was clean, beautiful, and perfect. It hit the back of the rim, bounced high, then fell through the net. The gym erupted. The underdog team had won. The players rushed the court, overwhelmed by what they had just accomplished. They had done it. They had overcome their biggest challenge, and now they were the champions. The coach, who had watched the entire game unfold, stood at the edge of the court with a proud smile. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for. It wasn't just about the victory, it was about the belief that had carried them through every setback, every moment of doubt. They had earned this win, not because they were the most talented, but because they had come together as a team and played with heart. As the players embraced, some of them crying with joy, they looked up at the stands, where their families, friends, and community members were cheering. This victory wasn't just for them, it was for everyone who had believed in them when they hadn't believed in themselves. It was for the town that had supported them, for the fans who had showed up to every game, and for the legend who had silently shown them what it meant to believe in the impossible. After the game, the team gathered in the locker room, their faces full of emotion. They were champions, but they knew that what had really changed was their understanding of themselves. They weren't just players on a team, they were a family. And they had done something together that none of them would ever forget. As they celebrated, the coach walked in, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it," he said simply. "You proved that when you believe in each other, there's nothing you can't accomplish." The team stood together, united by a bond that would last long after the game ended. They had started the season as a group of individuals, each struggling with their own doubts. But now, they were champions, not just of the game, but of belief. They had proved that with heart, hard work, and unity, anything was possible. The trophy was just a symbol of the journey they had taken together, and in that moment, they knew they had achieved something far more valuable than a championship. They had learned what it truly meant to believe in themselves. The championship win had been a high point, but it was not the end of the journey for the team. In the weeks following the final game, things began to settle back into a new kind of normal. The town's support continued to grow, and the team found themselves becoming local heroes. People wanted to talk to them, to share in their success. Coaches from larger schools reached out, seeing potential and wanting to recruit the players, especially the star guard, whose performance had turned him into the talk of the town. But amidst all the attention, the players found themselves in a space of reflection. They knew that the championship wasn't the finish line, it was just the beginning. The victories they had achieved on the court had been impressive, but the real growth had taken place off the court. The confidence they had gained, the relationships they had built, and the belief in themselves that had been sparked by one single act of faith had changed them forever. The team met often after the season ended. They weren't just celebrating their win, they were taking stock of how far they had come. The star guard, the player who had been instrumental in the team's success, was grappling with the changes that had come with his newfound recognition. He had been the quiet player at the start of the season, unsure of his abilities and uncertain of his place. But now, he found himself at a crossroads, with college scouts calling and his future seeming full of possibilities. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for all of this," he admitted one evening during a team gathering. Everything's changed so quickly. I don't want to lose what we've built here. The coach, who had become a mentor to the players, listened quietly before speaking. What you've built here, what all of you have built, cannot be lost. The wins are great, but the real victory is the belief you have in yourselves and in each other. That's something you carry with you wherever you go. The game will always change, but the lessons you've learned and the bond you've created won't. His words resonated with the team, reminding them of what they had truly achieved. It wasn't just about basketball anymore, it was about how they had grown as individuals and as a collective. Each player had found his own strength, but they had also discovered that they were stronger together. As the months passed, the town's support for the team never faded. They had become a symbol of what could be accomplished through hard work, belief, and unity. People from all over the region began talking about the small-town team that had defied the odds. The players were recognized in the community, celebrated not just for their athleticism but for the way they had carried themselves with humility and grace in the face of adversity. For the team's leader, the Star Guard, the future was uncertain. College offers came flooding in, and the idea of leaving his small town to play at a higher level was both thrilling and intimidating. He had never imagined a future in basketball, never considered that his love for the game could lead to something more. Yet here he was, with the chance to take his talents to a larger stage. One afternoon, as he sat alone on the court where it all began, the sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. It was his former teammate, the center, who had been a constant presence throughout the season. They had become close over the past year, bonding not just as teammates but as friends. "You thinking about next steps?" the center asked, sitting down beside him. "Yeah," the guard replied, looking out at the empty court. "I don't know if I'm ready. I don't want to let everyone down, and I'm not sure I can handle all the pressure." The center smiled, knowing exactly how he felt. "Look, I get it. But you've already shown you can handle a lot. You led us when we needed it most, and now it's time to lead yourself. Whatever you decide, just remember what got you here. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about doing it for yourself." The guard nodded, taking in his teammates' words. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he had learned to trust himself, and for the first time, he truly believed that he could handle whatever came next. The team had given him that belief. The coach had given him that belief. And now, it was time for him to continue the journey, not just for the team, but for the man he had become. The team's last gathering before the end of the season was a bittersweet one. The players had grown so close, and yet they knew that life would soon pull them in different directions. Some would move on to college, others would focus on their futures in different ways, but all of them knew they had experienced something that would stay with them forever. The coach addressed them one final time. "You've all done something incredible this year. You've not just won games, you've become something greater than you ever imagined. But remember, this is just the beginning. The world outside this gym is waiting for you, and the lessons you've learned here will stay with you for the rest of your lives. Go forward and keep believing. And no matter where life takes you, know that you'll always be a part of this team." There were no big speeches, no elaborate farewells. Just a quiet understanding that they had experienced something special, something that no one could ever take away from them. As they walked out of the gym for the last time as a team, they were no longer just a group of players who had won a championship. They were a group of young men who had learned the power of belief, and that was a lesson they would carry with them forever. In the years that followed, each player went on to pursue his own path, some continuing in basketball, others moving into different careers. But every time they looked back at the season that had changed their lives, they remembered the lessons they had learned, the importance of trust, of playing for something bigger than yourself, and most importantly, of believing in the impossible. For the Star Guard, the journey didn't end with the championship. He moved on to college, where he became a key player on his new team, but he never forgot the lessons he had learned in that small-town gym. He carried the spirit of that team with him, always playing not just for the win, but for the love of the game and for the teammates who had shown him what it truly meant to be part of something bigger. And as for the town, the story of the team's rise continued to be told for years to come. It was a story of belief, of overcoming doubt, and of the power of a group of young men who learned to trust in themselves and each other. It was a story that, much like the victory itself, would live on long after the final buzzer had sounded. The championship wasn't just a trophy, it was a reminder that anything was possible when you believed.